You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, Stephen J. Rubin, and hey, I'm the guy who's trying to replace Ed McMahon, Mike Faber. Today, we talk to author Mark Malkoff, talking about his book, Love, Johnny Carson. And now, here's Steve.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Mark, everyone has been very impressed with how much work you did on this. It's funny, I'm being an author myself and interviewing people. I try to get to everybody I possibly can who knew a subject, but is it true that you reached out to 400 people? Is that true?
I actually probably reached out to close to maybe 1,500. I talked to 400 people, over 400 people, but I definitely got some rejections along the way. But yeah, I did for the book and a podcast I did about Johnny Carson for 8 years. I did almost 400 episodes, and then I talked to more people. So yeah, over 400.
Mark, could you tell us how? Give us a hint of how the rejection would come.
The rejection would either be radio silence. I would reach out to somebody like Dave Letterman or Bette Midler and just either get denied or silence. I mean, there were just people I'm like, I just wanted, like Burt Reynolds, for example. I tried. There's a long list of people that
how
for
are
whatever
you reaching
reason,
out? On email?
I tried either email. I really did try to get to either them or their assistants, or I didn't like to do publicists or managers or agents unless I had to. Sometimes that worked, but I tried to go to the people directly, and that did help me. That's what got me in with almost the vast majority of them.
Well, were you able to tell people, look, I've already spoken to Fluck
Yes.
and Fluck and Bluck and Fluck? Yeah.
Like Charles Grodin, I just put a stamp and sent him a letter to Connecticut, and he reached out to me. It was Martin Mull. I sent a letter to his home in LA, and he reached out to me by email, and we got together at the Fox lot where he was filming something. So, I couldn't really do this remote recording when I was doing this. So I was in people's homes and offices in California and New York primarily.
Did you ever bump into one of your targets on the street and say, "Oh, I have this project"?
I've wanted to. That has not happened yet. I'm always in Central Park looking at if I'm going to run into Seinfeld or Tom Hanks or Bette Midler or somebody, but it hasn't happened yet. But I'm definitely hopeful that somebody on the Holy Grail. I mean, I got my Holy Grail was definitely like Doc Severinsen, who I got, Peter Lasalle, Johnny's producer, and people like Mel Brooks that was on Johnny's first show. But there are still people that I would love to talk to that are just notoriously difficult to get to say yes.
How did you do it with Mel?
Mel only said yes because Carl Reiner told him to. I was in Beverly Hills with Carl Reiner, and Carl told Mel, you have to meet this kid. He's really, really knows a lot. And then I went to Culver City. I was invited the next day to go to Culver City to Mel's office, and it was wonderful. I mean, Mel was doing routines that he did on Carson in the 60s in New York. I mean, he was telling me, because I really wanted to, and I get talk about this in the book, Johnny's very first show, October 1st, 1962, Joan Crawford, Rudy Vallée, Tony Bennett, the Phoenix Singers. And I wanted to know what that first episode was like. Also, Rudy Vallée, and Mel told me, he was like, I was backstage with Groucho Marx, who was the surprise guest who interviewed Johnny, and just to really get that from Mel's point of view was really special.
Well, one of the most, I think I've read a lot of books in show business. Yeah. And as I've told you, this is one of the best books I've ever read.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That means a lot.
Love, Johnny Carson. And what you've done is it's a real love letter to show business. Anybody who's interested in show business, you've divided up, you explain it by decade. Mm-hmm. You show his early years, but you have wonderful stories. And anyone who had any interest in Johnny Carson would have to buy this book because it's really special. Now, how did you get hooked on Johnny Carson? You are really a Carson guy.
Okay, so when I was a kid, my dad, when I was 5 or 6 years old, got me into movies like Stanley Kramer's "It's a Mad, 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 Mad World." So I'm talking in kindergarten. Everyone's talking about Mickey Mouse. I'm talking about Jonathan Winters. He got me into classic show business. So on Friday nights, I could stay up and watch Carson during the summers. And there was Johnny would do these primetime anniversary specials, and I would tape it on VHS and watch it over and over again. I mean, he was so likable and so funny with the animals, with kids, with people that weren't famous that had, weird hobbies. And then you'd have him on with Rodney Dangerfield or Rickles or whoever it was. And it was at this party, and there was nobody more likable than Carson. And I was intrigued by it. And I really wanted to know who was holding the curtain open for Johnny backstage. I got to talk to the guy. I mean, I talked to everybody on his crew, people that knew him, and got all my questions answered for the most part.
But Marco, I'm doing a little arithmetic here. You don't look, all kidding aside, you don't look more than 14, 15 years old.
Oh, you're so nice.
And
I'm in my 40s.
Wait a minute, but you're going back to some stuff. You're talking about stuff that was there a lot of years ago. You're talking about
That's
in retro?
Right.
You were seeing these things in retro?
Yes, I was not alive for a lot of Carson's run. I was 16 when he went off the air on May 22nd, 1992 in Hershey, Pennsylvania. I remember it very well. I remember the significance of this guy who was in our life for 30 years. I wasn't 30, saying goodbye and what that meant to popular entertainment. I mean, just the fact the guy dominated for 30 years without any serious competition is unbelievable.
I want to just say real fast that unbelievable about this. 2 days before he went on the air with the show in 1962, I was having lunch with some of the guys, a guy named Julie Rizzo, who you may have heard.
Oh, wow.
Sitting at a table, and there was Johnny Carson at about 2 tables away, having lunch with a couple of women who looked like they worked for him. And so the question came up to the 4 or 5 guys who were sitting at my table, do you think the guys are going to make it? And one of the people said, I think it was Jerry Vale. Yeah, I think it was Jerry Vale said, this guy's a much bigger talent than you think. He's much, much bigger than the game show kind of thing that we were familiar with,
Yeah, I mean, there was skepticism. Jack Parr was the biggest thing in television. Carson turned it down. Everybody told him, you need to turn this down. And wife number 2, it was his girlfriend at the time, was the one that convinced him. And Carson did not know that wife number 2 got 2 NBC execs, Mort Werner and Dave Tebbutt, to come to a Gary Moore Friars roast where Johnny was performing. And she secretly told them, offer him the Tonight Show if you think he's right. And he turned it down. She talked him into it. And she was hiring and firing producers. Johnny had no idea how powerful she was behind the scenes.
Is there, Mark, is there an archive that you could delve into in your research? Was Johnny a saver? Are all of his papers available at one of the universities?
I had been able to only see, I was just in his hometown and I was able to see some things, but thankfully I've been able to see an archive of clips that aren't available to the public. So that was really, really helpful. I mean, everything was preserved from almost from the Burbank years, the 20 years from May 1st, 1972 to when Johnny signed off. The first 10 years, unfortunately, there are some things that exist, but NBC erased the first 10 years and Johnny was furious. I mean, luckily in his brilliance, after, episodes like Ed Ames, Johnny said, I want a copy of this. And thankfully he did that because that's the only reason some of those clips survived.
Now, tell me about you did a podcast called Carson Podcast. And
that's right.
You did it for 8 years. Now,
yes.
Go on. No, keep going. I just lobbed it in. Go ahead.
I wanted to know what it was like with all these famous moments. So I'm in Beverly Hills with Ed Ames. He's in his 90s. He said, Mark, I didn't know how to throw a tomahawk. He was the star, one of the stars of Daniel Boone. He told me, Mark, I showed up for my singing rehearsal. He was known primarily as a singer. They teach him like an hour before to try to throw a tomahawk. And it just, the comedy gods are with him. And he throws this tomahawk. It's a wooden cutout of a cowboy, and it hits the crotch area. And history was made. To this day, it's still considered the longest sustained laughter by a comedy audience to this day.
Well, that take he did when Ed Ames tried to go back to get the
Yes.
talent. That take that Carson did was gold. You know, he grabbed his hand.
He did.
And I'm sure he had the line built in immediately, you know?
It was the Jack Benny mode. It was silence. He waited for the silence to build up. His hero was Jack Benny, and he played it for all the laughs and just was ad-libbing. But he wasn't
afraid
line,
of. Mark, was it Frontier?
I didn't even know you're. Frontier Briss. I didn't know you were didn't even know you were Jewish.
Yeah, right.
A couple of things. And every year on the anniversary show, people demanded that clip was played. There were a couple of years where they didn't, and people were outraged. And it became just this tradition. And I mean, it was one of the best, funniest moments, and it shows Carson's brilliance.
Can I ask a question? Did you read Henry Bushkin's book?
I did. Somebody gave it to me. It was there are some things in there that I know aren't true. Mr. Bushkin said Johnny died all alone. In my interpretation of the book, it did try to make it out Carson didn't have friends. I talked to his friends. He had friends. He did not die alone. His wife was there. His sons were there. He had family. To me, my interpretation is that he tried to make it out, again, that Carson was all alone and had nobody. Mm-hmm. And that was just simply not the case for me talking to all these people. So I did read the book. That was interesting. I'm sure a lot of it's true, but some of the stuff was just absolutely not.
Did you take a ride down PCH to get a look at where he lived?
I did. I went over to Malibu a couple times, and it's a gated where he lives. But it was really nice. And I know it's on the market right now, so I'd love to. I went to his old studio in NBC Burbank and went down to his office where he spent a lot of time. So those are some places, and I know he loved certain restaurants, and sometimes I would go to. He liked the Grill in Beverly Hills a lot. He liked Dantana's. So
everybody liked Dantana's. Julian, you and me, right?
Oh yes, and the Palm right next door.
Yes, he loved the Palm.
By the way, the restaurant in New York that we saw Johnny the 2 days before he went on the air was Lindy's. Made for you, Mark. Yes. My God, Julian, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Mark, we walk in, it's old school all the way. Jack Benny to the left, Milton Berle to the right.
Julian is always talking about Charles Grodin for good reason, because Charles was such a talent. I'm curious what you learned about their relationship, because they almost seem to be putting on a certain kind of play every time Charles would come on the show, unlike any of the other guests. Did you get any insight from Charles about how that started playing out?
I did. There were only maybe a handful of people, like 2 or 3 people that were under contract that Johnny said, I want you to do my show exclusively. Miss Joan Rivers was one. Grodin was another. Charles Grodin told me it wasn't until he first went on with Johnny in like 1972 that he decided backstage, I'm going to go on the show in character as this grumpy guy that's going to just give Johnny a lot of trouble. And Johnny just loved it. I mean, the viewers, a lot of people thought this was real. It was professional wrestling where Grodin would just make fun of Johnny. And it was hilarious. And that was one of the only times that Johnny would let somebody go on in character, because Johnny would not put on somebody I'm trying to think of who, somebody like Gilbert Gottfried or Emo Phillips, somebody that was in character. Carson thought the audience couldn't tell if it was real or not, like Pee Wee Herman. He wouldn't have on the show. But he did really think Grodin was funny, so he made an exception.
I think of all the notes I've ever given as a producer or as a friend, the best note I ever gave Chuck Grodin, who was a close friend of mine, was he said to me, they really think I don't like Johnny Carson. They really do. And I said,
Johnny,
here's my note, Chuck. Very simple. When you do it, you're saying it so straight. There's no smile. You do it with a smile, they'll love it. And that's what happened. So that's
so interesting. I know in retirement, they had a dinner together with the wives, and Johnny invited him to go to Africa on a safari. And Grodin didn't like to even leave Connecticut, so that wasn't going to happen.
The last years of Chuck's life, no matter what they offered him on a movie, it had to be New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania.
That's right. That's the first thing he said. It wasn't how much money am I being paid? Is it in Connecticut? Is it in New York? Yeah,
or Jersey?
Now, you mentioned the Ed Ames show. Tell us a couple of the guests that stand out in your research that really are legendary guests.
I mean, definitely getting Marlon Brando in 1963. It was the first time they ever went out west to the show, and back then they would have the most famous guest on at the end to keep people tuned in. And Johnny had this idea: we're going to go to Los Angeles, we're going to have champagne flowing backstage for the guest. And Brando for 90 minutes was just downing champagne. By the time he went out, he was just completely wasted. And him and Zsa Zsa Gabor went at it. I mean, it was really bad. I mean, the audiences loved it, the critics loved it, Johnny did it, but Zsa Zsa was furious. And it was definitely, when the alcohol was flowing, sometimes it just got contentious. Like with George Papard was drunk on the show. George Papard from the A-Team, Breakfast at Tiffany's in the 70s, and him and Paul Williams, the singer, almost went at it when George Papard called him a midget on the air, and it was bad.
Even though he was.
He was definitely short, but he got up ready to fight Papard. McMahon sat in the middle of them. Johnny, during this, there was so much chaos, and Johnny lost control. He went off camera, and Richard Harris, who wasn't even a guest, he was off the side with Fred DeCordova. Richard Harris sits down at Johnny's desk and starts hosting the show, just impromptu. I mean, it was so wild back then. And all the mistakes got in. If someone like Robert Goulet forgot the words to a song, Johnny would say, no, you're going to keep going till you get it. And there was something beautiful about all the mistakes getting in the show.
Yeah, it's true. And you talked about some of the most successful with Brando, but one of the most famous show is the one I'd have to say is ended up with, of all people, George Gobel. I mean, that was some show because the time he came out. Yeah. So you tell a little bit about that, Mark.
George Gobel in 1969 thought he was going on Carson's show, and he said he was told he was the only comedian. So Gobel was very confident. Great, I'm going to be the only comedian on here. And then they're doing a sketch, and that morning, one of Johnny Carson's talent coordinators, Shirley Wood, booked Bob Hope. Okay, fine. Bob Hope's doing a sketch. He's not going to be on. And then right before the show, Dean Martin was in a tuxedo walking past, or a suit walking past, and said, hey, can I do a walk-on? And so Gobel is a mess right now. I mean, all these people, but Hope wasn't supposed to sit down. So the fact that Gobel had to follow these icons who were not scheduled, he was terrified that he had to follow them. And what happened is Gobel used an ad-lib that he had used 10 years earlier on Steve Allen's show that nobody realized that he had used this previously, and it just kind of came to him where he said, what was the line? It was like, do you ever get the feeling that you're the world's a tuxedo and you're a pair of brown shoes?
Socks, yeah.
Brown socks, yeah. And it was amazing TV. But Dean Martin flicking cigarette ashes into the drink and the alcohol flowing, it was definitely one of the funniest things that ever happened on that show. And that's when the show would go from New York to LA on those trips. That's when the show went off the rails and got wild, when everybody like Carl Reiner, John Byner, and Carson all took off their shirts and they're shirtless. Ed McMahon, it's like you just never knew what was going to happen. And back in New York, it was a little bit more conservative and grounded.
Well, it's true, as television kind of reflected what was happening in the society as well. That, you know, what used to be you couldn't show, you could, and people could be in bed in the same, even if they were married, they could show it in movies. It just changed, and he went along with it. Quite,
you know, we still have a little touch of it when they have the Golden Globes broadcast, Julian. The liquor is flowing freely in the ballroom, and there have been some funny moments with the Golden Globes. But you're right; it's much more conservative now. Of course, the whole country has been changing its tenor a little bit, but this is a lot of fun. You know, I have a lot of friends who are stand-up comedians, and I think that Johnny's show was the ultimate place to make your debut, and the almost. The dynamic.
You would get anointed.
You'd get it anointed.
It's true.
And it's almost like a Machiavellian thing to get into the show. And then the big thing was, would you be allowed to sit in a chair after your performance? Which of course was big credit to those.
Oh, your life changed overnight, Steve. You know. I mean,
it did for a lot of. It only happened 15 times or so that people were called over. But someone like Jerry Seinfeld, it took 5 times to get called over. Where someone like Drew Carey or Ellen DeGeneres or Rodney Dangerfield got called over right away. I mean, there were certain powerhouses that, I mean, were just, it didn't matter. They were going to get called over. Rodney was somebody that him and Johnny, feuded for years, so he wasn't able to get on until like 1969, 1970. It took a while, but once he did, powerhouse.
But
he
had a reason for it, and you should tell us.
Yes.
You tell us in the book.
Dangerfield wrote Johnny an obscene letter, and those are Dangerfield's words, that with all these 4-letter words, accusing Carson's, one of his writers, of stealing Dangerfield's joke, and Johnny doing it on air. And then Dangerfield couldn't get booked for years and years and tried. And finally, at the Copacabana, Dangerfield saw Carson and his manager, Stan Irwin, waiting in line for Tony Bennett, and it was a huge line. And Dangerfield was working the Copa and got Carson and his manager through the service entrance and apologized to Carson. So he finally was able to do the show, but he was told, Johnny, we'll have you on, but there's no way you're going over to the couch. Johnny still has hard feelings, and you're not going to get called over. But Dangerfield was such a powerhouse that Johnny waved him over. Most comedians go in on Carson, 25 jokes. Dangerfield, 25 jokes doing stand-up, sits down with Carson, another 25 jokes, double. And he would not go on unless he had A-list gold material. And the fact that his YouTube videos with Dangerfield and Carson have millions of views is testament to how funny that stuff was, and it still is.
Yeah, they play it all the time on the internet. You can see it the time. But they had a real run-in you write about when Dangerfield tried to get Johnny home safely. And that
1983, Johnny would talk on the Tonight Show. He struggled with drinking. It wasn't a secret. He was a bad drunk. Dangerfield tried to help Johnny get home after a night at the comedy club in Los Angeles, and Dangerfield never got a thank you from Johnny. And Dangerfield said, "I'm never doing the show again." And one of Dangerfield's friends said, "Johnny probably doesn't even remember that you helped him," which Johnny didn't remember a lot when he had a lot to drink. So Dangerfield wouldn't do the show for like 8 years, and then it was near the end of Johnny's run that he got a little nostalgic, and Dangerfield was promoting a movie for Paramount. I think it was Ladybugs that he finally went back on with Johnny. But I definitely think he was probably the funniest stand-up, the best stand-up to ever do the show, consistently, for sure.
Yeah, well, he loved Rickles. He did love Rickles. And they loved each other. That was
Don. Can you imagine this? In 1965, Don Rickles is an unknown to the American public, and Johnny has to take 2 or 3 minutes to explain to the studio audience and the people at home, okay, this next comedian is going to come out. He's going to make fun of me, but it's okay. We can laugh at it. And it was this whole thing where it was decided that Rickles would come out, make fun of Skitch Henderson, the band leader, and Ed McMahon. Then the audience would see Johnny laughing, and then it would finally be okay for this gentleman that they don't know, Don Rickles, to make fun of Johnny. But that was unheard of, to have somebody on a late night show that would make fun of the people that were there. So Rickles always gave Sinatra and Carson credit for the biggest breaks of his careers. And then once Rickles went on Johnny's show, of course, he never stopped. And it was just such a big event when Rickles was on.
Well, the thing about Rickles is that there were probably 100 different comedians through the years who tried to do that. And some did pretty good. Some did Jackie Leonard. They became that. They became, others. Never really anywhere. But Jerry Lewis once said, and Rickles came along and he found the key and he made magic. Because every time he was on that show, forget about it. I mean, it was pure gold.
Rickles would be backstage. He'd be backstage warming up with the insults with the people that worked on the show. They had a pre-interview that they never touched. Betty Hacka was another person. They never touched the pre-interview. They had it as a failsafe, never had to touch it. You were saying something? Sorry, I interrupted one of you.
Oh, I just wanted to jump in real quickly.
Yeah.
When you read a little bit into Johnny's life, you get the impression after a while that Johnny felt trapped on the show. Would you say, based on all of your research, that there was a certain sense in the latter part of career that he wanted out earlier than he did?
I think it was really tough. In the beginning, he was doing an hour and 45 minutes. He was exhausted with the show. And I definitely think he had other ambitions, but he knew that most of the time when people left an established show like that, they just never got their careers back as where they were. I mean, Jack Parr, when he left, he told Dick Cavett for years it was the biggest mistake of his life to leave. So I think Carson wisely He almost left so many times, but knew that this was really my love, is the Tonight Show. I mean, he had so many movie offers. Swifty Lazar came on with a check with $1 million for like a couple weeks of work. Carson turned it down. He turned down Steve McQueen's role in Bullet. Carson knew that this is what the audience accepts me on, and this is the biggest forum I'm going to have. So, yeah, I mean, nobody expected. I mean, Jack Paar and Steve Allen did, what, 4 or 5 years? The fact that somebody would do 10 years on a late night show was unheard of, let alone 30 years. So it was definitely a surprise to Ed and Johnny that they stuck around for as long as they did.
Did I just hear you say that Johnny was offered the lead role in Bullet?
Yeah, he was offered a bunch of movies and he just would say no to it because in his mind, first of all, he just never thought that that you could make a transition from a talk show host to a movie star. He said the public, no one's ever done it successfully. He thought the sitcom was the death of a career, so he always said no to doing sitcoms. And he hated the process of making movies because he went down to Florida for Looking for Love with Connie Francis. And, it's like 3 hours. We have to light the scenery and everything's out of order. And Carson just had no patience. So, right. Yeah, he turned down a lot of money.
Now, Mark, you learned and still know what it is to be a stand-up because you are yourself a stand-up.
I used to. It's been a long time. I'm going to go back. But yeah, doing a stand-up and getting on that show was everybody's dream. I mean, so many of the stand-ups had tears in their eyes recounting their stories.
No, but I wanted to ask you, did you get to understand Carson a little more, you think, because of your experience as a stand-up?
I think so. I mean, it was just like everybody wanted those 5 minutes to get on Carson's radar and just how important it was to have not only material that worked, but material that really worked for America. I mean, there are comedians that can get huge laughs with 4-letter words, but when you went on Carson's show, you had to work clean. And I definitely think that the people with the best careers, the longest careers, are able to do that. So, yeah, I mean, the Carson thing was why people moved out to Los Angeles, like David Letterman, and just going on that. Seinfeld says to this day, going on Carson in 81 was the biggest moment of his career by far. And that is definitely, comedians will tell me I have 2 birthdays. One when I was really born and my Carson debut is the second. 2 birthdays.
But Letterman worked out in New York, didn't he? At the Ed Sullivan there?
He did, but in 1973, he was a weatherman making good money in Indianapolis, and he drove his red pickup truck across the country to Los Angeles to the Comedy Store. And Johnny put him on, and within 4 months, he's guest hosting the Tonight Show as an unknown. I mean, that was the first person to ever guest host the show as an unknown, him and Gary Shandling. And Shandling was only because Albert Brooks had a kidney stone and was in the hospital. They needed somebody last minute, and they put Shandling on as an unknown to guest host. And they both had huge careers.
I'm curious to know something. Yeah. In the 60s, where most of those tapes are gone, right?
Unfortunately.
I had a dear friend of mine who we worked together in the Columbia Pictures mailroom together. And he went on to have a singing career, a good singing career, never where it should have been. But he taught Johnny how to play the guitar. And
oh my goodness, Tommy?
Kenny Rankin.
Oh,
ever hear of him?
Yeah, I know who Kenny Rankin is. Yeah.
Kenny taught him how to play the guitar. And Carson had him on 18 times in those years, Julia.
Yeah.
He loved him because he taught him how to play that guitar, which he loved.
Yeah.
And but he gave Kenny a career.
Yet there were certain musicians that, Carson had loyalty with that would just you put them on. Joe Williams was one. Yeah, Carson was really was a frustrated singer, according to Steve Lawrence. They were good friends. Carson, in I think it was 1966 in Las Vegas at the Sahara Hotel, had already beat Judy Garland's attendance record. I mean, they were turning people away at the Sahara for Carson. Carson decided he was going to sing a song and got guitar lessons. And he started to sing, maybe it was like Here's That Rainy Day, or it was some song that was really serious, and the audience just started laughing. They couldn't accept Carson was trying to do something serious, and Carson was so embarrassed. So a year later on The Tonight Show, he told the audience, this is for real, I'm going to try to do this. And he was nervous, but he took voice lessons from Sue Seaton, who taught Katharine Hepburn, who taught Audrey Hepburn as well. I think Audrey Hepburn. So yeah, he definitely took the music very, very seriously and was a frustrated singer.
Mark,
and a big jazz enthusiast, wasn't he?
Oh my goodness, the biggest. When Buddy Rich was in town, Carson would always go in New York and LA. Carson would play drums with Buddy Rich, and Carson was like a little kid with people like Joe Williams. And when he grew up in Nebraska, he'd go to the Orpheum, and it would be just all the best jazz greats. I mean, yeah,
What
Carson was a
do you
little kid.
think of his interview with Mike Wallace?
He was very, very nervous to do that. At one point, he agreed to do 60 Minutes and he backed out. I thought he did well with Wallace. One of Carson's colleagues' friends told Johnny that Mike might ask you about the drinking, and Johnny got very nervous. But Johnny's friend said, you know what? Better just to address it and be open with it. And I think that it's not a secret that you struggle with drinking. I thought Wallace did a really good job. I mean, and Johnny would talk on the Tonight Show. He struggled with alcohol. I thought it humanized him. People that were there told me that, Johnny was a competitive guy, as was Mike Wallace. And they were playing tennis the next day. And oh man, both of them would have given like anything to win. I mean, there's competition between the two of those guys. Yeah.
I want to direct this question to Julian.
Yeah,
Julian, Mike Wallace, in the pantheon of all those guys and girls, where do you put him in terms of interviewing?
He was the best interviewer I ever saw on television.
He's great.
He was the best, and he was fearless. He would do things that nobody in those days would do. He was just a terrific. And I wanted to talk to Mark about Joan Rivers because it became extremely public what happened and everyone seemed to know all about it. But I'm curious what you think. Why did she not tell Johnny Carson? I mean,
it's complicated. Miss Rivers in 1965 makes her Carson debut. She was a writer on with Alan Funt on Candid Camera. Goes on she never did stand up on the show. She was always a seated guest, and Carson loved her. I mean, she was touted by Walter Winchell and all these columnists as the next Carol Burnett. Was on with Johnny right away, and she was such an amazing guest host. I mean, Johnny would watch the guest host at home. You'd have people like Arnold Palmer trying to guest host the show, or Lorne Greene from Bonanza, and Johnny would be like, it was just hard for him to watch. He'd get a kick out of these people trying to do his job. But Joan was such a good guest host. And unfortunately, what happened is Barry Diller told me here in New York, Barry Diller was the head of Fox, that he told Miss Rivers, you have to tell Johnny that you're going to be competing against him on Fox opposite. You owe this to him. And Miss Rivers, for whatever reason, a lot of people say it was her husband advised her, you can't tell Johnny, there'll be unforeseen circumstances. And she had signed a deal with Fox like 2.5 months prior and not told Johnny. She was still in negotiations with Carson Productions because Johnny owned the Tonight Show to keep guest hosting the show, even though she had no intentions. So when Johnny found out, and he found out from NBC president Brandon Tartikoff, he couldn't believe, he was devastated and so hurt that Joan would do this. Not only that, Joan admits this. She tried to take Peter LaSalle, Johnny's producer, over to Fox. Every talent coordinator of Johnny's got a phone call, double their salary to go with Joan to Fox. None of them did out of loyalty's sake. And Johnny just could not believe that Joan wouldn't tell him and would be trying to take his staff. I mean, Johnny was wounded. Once he was wounded, he didn't get revenge. They just didn't exist anymore.
No, he did what John Barrymore says on the 20th century. I closed the iron door on them.
Certain people, like Wayne Newton, there were certain people that just, they just did not exist in his world anymore. If he felt that some people slighted him. Dick Clark never could get booked on the Tonight Show. Not one time with Johnny. And Dick Clark said it went all the way back to Bandstand when Carson was just starting out on Who Do You Trust? And Bandstand was getting huge ratings. Carson's game show when it first started, not so much. So they were trying to put, I think in between Bandstand, they were going to put Carson in between. And Dick Clark said absolutely not. And Dick Clark theorizes that Johnny remember that all those years, and even though that they did business together and they produced together bloopers and practical jokes, Clark said Johnny, I'm sure, remembered, was hurt by it, and never had me on as a guest. So that would be.
Do you remember? Do you know the story of why he hated Wayne Newton and why Wayne Newton hated him?
I do. They were okay. So they were everything was good until 1973. Mr. Newton had been on with Carson at least once in the 60s and then was going on with some guest hosts, not with Johnny. And then in 1973, and Mr. Newton has told the story two different ways. He was in Los Angeles. This was, I believe, February. And Mr. Newton's, the first version, he said, is that he was watching television that night and watching Carson's show. And Carson said, in his monologue, he said, I saw Wayne Newton and Liberace in a pink hot tub together. I wonder what that means. First of all, Liberace was guest hosting the show, would go on with Johnny all the time. And Johnny didn't make gay jokes about Liberace. He would make fun of his outfits, but didn't do gay jokes. And then Mr. Newton said the second version was that he went into Capitol Records. He was recording a gospel album, and his drummer said, hey, I was watching Carson last night, and he mentioned that you and Liberace in a pink hot tub. What do you think that's about? So it might have been lost in translation. Wayne Newton did go drive unannounced to Johnny's office, barged in. There was yelling. That did happen. But Johnny talked to Newton. It was all good. They shook hands. Johnny had Wayne Newton on the show to promote his album. He let Wayne Newton guest host the show a few times for the first time ever. It was all good until 1980, because Newton had been going on Johnny's show. Again, peace, everything, they liked each other. 1980, Johnny bid on the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. It was it looked like Carson was going to get this. He didn't. They went with Wayne Newton's bid, which was far less than Carson. NBC News then, a couple months later, I believe it was a couple months later, did 3 stories on Wayne Newton allegedly having mob ties to a known mafia figure. Now, Wayne Newton was convinced that Johnny used his influence with NBC to get those stories orchestrated without any proof that I'm aware of. And Johnny, denied it. Fred Silverman at NBC denied it. And Wayne Newton sued NBC News and won a lot of money, but on appeal didn't get a dime. And Johnny never mentioned Mr. Newton ever again. I mean, it was one single joke that Johnny ever did, and he was playing Jacques Cousteau, a sketch, and he said he was drinking vials of water, and he could tell where the vials of water were from, and this is from the Pacific, this is from the Atlantic. Ooh, this is quite sweet. This is from Wayne Newton's pool. That was the joke that Johnny actually did in 1973. To my knowledge, it was one joke. And then in 1980, Johnny never mentioned him again. And then Mr. Newton waited until Johnny died in 2005, a couple years later, went on Larry King Live and said those stories from NBC News linking him to the mob, all emulated from Johnny, didn't give any proof whatsoever. And that's where they stood.
Mark, Julian and I just looked at a video on Instagram or something with Jay Leno, who was being interviewed. And he mentioned a story where he claimed there was a hit out on Carson by the mob for screwing around with some of their girls.
There is Jay got the story a little bit wrong, but you're talking about Jilly Rizzo. 1971, Henry Bushkin got the story, a bunch of things wrong with this story, but in 1971, this is what happened. Crazy Joe Gallo was in prison for like 10 years, had just gotten out, was at Jilly's with his girlfriend, went to the bathroom. Carson was with Ed McMahon and McMahon's manager, Robert Coe. Johnny had way too much to drink, did some inappropriate stuff to Gallo's girlfriend, and Jilly Rizzo told McMahon, get him the blank out of here, Johnny, out of here. And Gallo then put a hit out on Johnny, and Johnny was holed up in his apartment at the UN, and a couple things had to happen. Number one, Sinatra, Dave Tebbutt, the head of NBC, and Jilly Rizzo went to Sinatra, and Sinatra had to intervene and sit down with Gallo, who we knew, and said, I need a favor. Leave Johnny Carson alone. And Gallo said, Johnny Carson only lives and breathes because he knows Frank Sinatra. But then NBC had to appease the acting boss, which was Joe Colombo. So what they did, and I watched this with my own eyes, this happened. They had to do a positive NBC News story on Joe Colombo and his Italian, whatever that league is. And they did it in prime time, not even right when the news was, where the ratings were bigger. And they did that to appease Colombo. And that absolutely did happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a story. I have a question. Being a kind of serial Oscar viewer all over the years, Johnny had a good run hosting the Oscars. It sounds like it was like a perfect gig for him.
He loved doing it, but him and Marty Pacetta, who was the director, hated each other. Carson, his whole process was no cutaways when I'm doing the monologue. Pacetta wanted to cut away. Carson said keep the lights down. Pacetta wanted the lights up. Carson was the only in the history of the Oscars host, no cue cards, no teleprompter. He would memorize everything and edit in his head according to the laughs.
Never knew that.
Unbelievable brilliance. He took a memory course. It was either Harry Lorraine, the magician, or they had a memory course, or Bornstein, one of the two. But Carson had almost a photographic memory.
It's so funny because the Oscar monologues have gotten so bad of late. It's funny because supposedly they get the best writers in town for a very important gig, and the writing is horrible. Yet Johnny set the bar very high because he obviously memorized his jokes, but they were classy. I miss that.
Mark, every night on his show, he was doing a monologue. He wasn't memorizing those. He was reading right.
It wasn't word for word. When he would do the monologue for the Tonight Show, it would be on boards. It would be on just the key words for each joke. So it wouldn't have every single word. And he would edit and go around the board based on what jokes were doing well. He might skip over something if it wasn't going well. But yeah, his memory was, everybody told me, was unbelievable. He was concerned when he hosted the Oscars for the first time, because to have somebody that wasn't involved in movies was, I don't think, ever done that. You had a host that was a TV guy. So yes, he did one movie, Looking for Love, and they made fun of it, but he was definitely skeptical, just really nervous. He had, I think, to my knowledge, 4 writers. Now they have for the Oscars, for the host, something like 20 plus. It's, I think, something like that. It seems.
Yeah,
they can't get it right. They can't get it right.
They're pretty bad, but no.
Mark, I'm interested in asking you. Many people over the years have said that when the red light went out, that was the end of Johnny, so to speak. In your book, I don't really get that feeling. What did you think? Was there any truth to any of that, do you think?
I mean, it was definitely true when the show was over, and Johnny did an hour and 45 minutes, then 90 minutes, and then finally, eventually 60. He was exhausted from being Johnny Carson out there, that he would definitely sometimes shut down and protect his energy, which might look like that he was not Johnny Carson. The people I talked to that spent the most time with him told me consistently, the people that knew him, that said he was almost the same Johnny Carson on and off camera, but it was a small group of people that really knew him, like Newhart, David Steinberg, Peter LaSalle. Those type of people told me it was almost the same Carson, which, the media made him out to be cold and aloof. So I was shocked to talk to these people that knew him and his friends that said he was almost the same Johnny. That to me was a huge light bulb moment.
Mark, there's a young guy out there now. I'm sure you've heard of him. Matt Friend, who does these impressions.
Oh yeah, he's really talented.
He's making it. I mean, he's going to be a big star. He's become star now.
He's great.
He's great at what he does. He does a great Johnny Carson.
He does.
But, the thing about it is that sometimes I refer to the world of the elite of the elites. Like, a lot of guys played golf, and then along came Tiger Woods. A lot of guys played baseball, and along came Willie Mays. Sure. There's these people that come along every now and then that are so great at what they do, it's unbelievable. Johnny Carson in talk shows, there was nothing like him. He owns it. I mean, I don't care how good, loved Mike Douglas or certainly
Merv
Phil
Griffin.
Donahue. Who's that?
Merv Griffin,
Merv Griffin was terrific. But along comes Carson, and there's Tiger Woods. There's Michael Jordan. He was that great. You know that for sure, having done all the research. I did a little bit of research to find out just how big he was in the 70s and 80s when he got out to the West Coast. He was ridiculous. He was getting 20 million viewers a night.
It was 25%. It was like 25% of NBC's profits. I mean, as a broadcaster, and the influence that guy had was unbelievable. Yeah, the gentleman that you mentioned, Matt Friend, the young guy, I saw him. He was with Rich Little and all these people. Rich Little was somebody I sat down with twice, and he was banned from Johnny's show because Johnny's producer just got tired of Rich Little, and he thought Rich Little was doing the same impressions over and over again. And yeah, Johnny deferred to his producer, but yeah, Rich Little guest hosted the show like 40 or 50 times.
Mark, how did Ed McMahon enter the picture? How was he introduced to the show?
Ed was not supposed to come to the Tonight Show. Johnny was hosting an ABC game show called Who Do You Trust? Johnny wanted to start completely fresh on the Tonight Show with nobody that had any identity to the game show. So he wanted to bring his friend Hank Sims from Los Angeles. His friend Hank Sims did not want to relocate. Back then, these shows would only go 4 or 5 years. It was unheard of that a show would go 10 years in late night, let alone 30. So Hank Sims, his friend, was not going to move. Ed McMahon did the smartest thing that he ever did maybe in his life, certainly his career, was he took Johnny to Danny's hideaway with the wives. Ed McMahon got down on his hands and knees, tears down his face, and begged Johnny to take him. He said, I just got a new house in King of Prussia. I need this. And Johnny said, fine, I'll take you. 30 years of employment. Now, Johnny and Ed in New York were tight. They were friends. They would have dinner after the show. Ed would make sure Johnny got home safely if he was drinking. But once they got to California, they did drift apart. They have birthdays. They would get together here and there, but it was not the same.
But didn't Ed McMahon work with him on a game show?
Yeah. Who Do You Trust? Yeah. And whenever Ed McMahon needed something like Star Search, Johnny just thought it was ridiculous. McMahon was endorsing something like 100 products at one point. I mean, he was in movies. He was on Broadway. He was doing anything. That guy was just from Atlantic City days as a huckster. In Atlantic City selling those Morris metric slicers. I mean, yeah, that guy knew how to sell, Ed McMahon.
In terms of you being a writer, how did your writing career begin, Mark? Did you start writing in college? Was that something that started early?
I did. I wrote some comedy in college. I had some day jobs on some TV shows here and there that weren't really creative, but I'd never written a book before, and I was scared out of my mind because, Johnny Carson is just such a big topic and I wanted to get it right, which is why I reached out to a gentleman named David Ritz who had done 65 books. I mean, he had done books one-on-one with Don Rickles, Ray Charles, everybody from Paul Schaefer to Aretha Franklin. So
what did he tell you?
David was the one that really thought there was a book here, and he really helped guide me through it because I was overwhelmed out of my mind to get this book. And he was just such a good editor and such a friend to help me with this book. And that was definitely a very I'm very fortunate thing that happened with the book.
And you made sure that he is the co-writer.
Yeah, I didn't know him. I reached out. The power of asking. I mean, I couldn't believe. People would ask me, Mark, how did you get these iconic people to say yes to go in on the podcast? I'm like, one, just the power of asking. Two, some of these people told me, like Jimmy Buffett said, Mark, you're the first person that's ever asked me about Johnny Carson. It was the biggest break of my career. 1981, Jimmy Buffett said, I could not get on television, and it was because of Johnny Carson. You're the first one to ask. So it was definitely a combination of the power of asking, and a lot of these people had never shared their stories.
You never know. Yeah. Where'd you go to college, Mark?
I went to NYU.
All right.
Oh, me too. Anyhow, but I was there 100 years before you. Here's what I'm interested in talking to you about. One of the most interesting chapters in this terrific book of yours is about Saturday Night Live and how much it hurt Johnny Carson to be lampooned as an old-timer out of touch.
Isn't it ironic that Johnny was responsible for Saturday Night Live? Johnny didn't want Saturday nights at 11:30 The Tonight Show anymore. Two 29-year-olds, Lorne Michaels and Dick Ebersol, sit down with Johnny in his office, pitch him this show called Saturday Night. And yeah, I mean, Johnny just wanted to make sure that wasn't like the Tonight Show. It wasn't. Johnny said, you have my blessing. 8 shows in I think this might have been December or January. It was very, very quick, a couple months in. New York Magazine puts Chevy Chase, who was an unknown months prior, is the likely successor to Johnny Carson. And Chevy was asked about replacing Carson, and Chevy said, I wouldn't want the job. And Johnny felt insulted. So Johnny was upset about that. And then Chevy Chase said some things about Johnny, and finally, a couple years later, Chevy wrote Johnny an apology letter and asked if he could come on the show. And Johnny said, absolutely, accepted the apology. They became poker buddies. Barry Diller, Steve Martin, Neil Simon, they all played poker together. So that was all good. And then in the 80s, Dana Carvey started playing Johnny Carson and would play him senile, out of touch, and Johnny just hated the sketches, and it broke his heart. And that was one of the contributing factors to Johnny retiring.
Did any or all of us see, by any chance, something that I fell into the misfortune of watching some of the Chevy Chase documentary on CNN this past weekend?
I have not seen it. I saw the trailer. I sat down with him for the podcast. I've been to his house before. He was very nice to me. He was friends with Johnny. He told me that, Johnny was almost the same person on and off camera, which a lot of people did. But that the documentary is definitely getting a lot of press. People are talking about it.
It was, unfortunately, it kind of showed his real personality. And it was not good. It was.
I will never understand why. He guest hosted once for Johnny Carson in 1986, and it did not go well. And Chevy the next month sat down with Johnny and said, "No one will never be the next Johnny Carson." He said, "It was the hardest thing I ever did. I never did a monologue. It was the hardest thing." And then a few years later, Chevy tries to launch his own show on Fox, and it lasted 26 episodes. And
Disaster.
Johnny tried to get Chevy not to do it. He said, "Chevy, 5 nights a week. This is the hardest thing. Don't." And yeah, Chevy unfortunately did it, and that was hard for him.
Mark, I'm interested in knowing, what did you find out about the background between Johnny and Ellen DeGeneres and what that problem was?
They were all good. I mean, in the beginning, she went on the show as an unknown and did, I think it was 1986, and did this sometime in the mid 80s. She did this Bob Newhart type routine that went over huge. She was the first woman in California to get called over to the couch. The first woman in New York was Liz Torres in 1970, I believe, 1971. But Ellen DeGeneres was called over. It was all good. And then Ellen's third appearance, they told her not to do a religious joke. She did it, and she was banned from the show. Johnny was upset. Johnny was an atheist. He was a humanist. He didn't believe in God at all, but he knew that his audience there were a lot of religious people. So when she did that joke, he was furious, and she wasn't allowed back.
As I understand it, Mark, going back before on Joan Rivers and leaving Carson, I believe that is the main reason what took place for her husband committing suicide.
It was really bad. It was 10 months into Miss Rivers' tenure, I believe, that Barry Diller said, "I am replacing your husband as producer." And Miss Rivers said, if you fire Edgar, I'm leaving. And Miss Rivers thought Mr. Diller was bluffing. He was not. And he removed Rivers from the show and started putting guest host in for the Late Show. 2 months later, Edgar Rosenberg tragically takes his life. And it was really, really sad. And Joan's resilience, she found out she was in debt millions of dollars then, and she rebuilt her entire life.
That's right, and it didn't hurt her material source for Edgar to commit suicide. She went right at it. She may have. She loved the guy.
She used a lot of her tragedy. It was really, really sad, but she definitely bounced back, and I give her a lot of credit.
I wanted to talk about the one chapter in the book, Mark, about having the great actor Peter Finch on. Before Network had come out, but he hadn't won the Academy Award yet.
Network was a movie that the people just were seeing in the theater multiple times. It was just such a good film, and this was his breakout. Peter Finch had moved to Los Angeles. He said, "Finally, I'm in my," he was in his early 60s. He's like, this is my big break. I'm nominated for an Academy Award. I'm with my wife. My life is starting. He goes on Carson's show, talks about Network, and I guess 10 hours later, dies at the Beverly Hills. I think it was at the Hilton. And it was just so sad. Carson the next day had to say, at the end of this show, had to be like, Peter Finch was with us last night. Unfortunately, he passed away, and our sympathy goes out to Mr. Mrs. Finch and the family. And Peter Finch then, I guess he passed away, but he still won the Oscar, which was a big deal. But Dick Cavett had somebody die on his show. That never happened to Carson, but that was the closest to Carson had somebody dying. So close.
If there was a Mount Rushmore of television, I think Carson would be right up there, top 4.
Of the current, Mark, of the current talk show hosts post Carson, who do you think Carson had the fondest feelings for?
Dave Letterman, by far. He wanted he wanted Letterman to take the gig, have the gig, but NBC never asked Johnny. And as you might know, Jay Leno, when he was the permanent guest host, went with his manager, Helen Kushnick. He went to every NBC affiliate and shook hands with everyone, politicking. Anything NBC needed, Jay would do. Whereas Dave Letterman was making fun of the NBC executives, calling them pinheads, making fun of GE, General Electric, which owned NBC. So when the time came to make the selection, it was a no-brainer. You're going to go with the person who's easiest to deal with. So Johnny was really not happy that it went to Jay, and but yeah, he was powerless.
Did he produce the Letterman show?
Yeah, Johnny actually produced and owned Dave, the NBC version, which lasted 11 and a half years at 12:30.
That I knew. I was wondering about CBS,
yeah,
no?
Johnny, the only person Johnny was terrified going head-to-head was David Letterman. And NBC had given David Letterman a morning show, so he wasn't competition with Johnny. The morning show lasted like 4 months, won some Emmys, got canceled. Then NBC paid David Letterman $1 million to do nothing. He was just sitting there. I think he guest hosted for Johnny maybe 4 times, and Letterman was getting antsy. Buddy Mora, it was Jack Rollins' client, David Letterman. So Buddy Mora was going to Westinghouse, and they were going to do a late night show opposite Johnny. Johnny went into panic mode and said the best case scenario for Letterman is putting Dave Letterman after me, owning the show and limiting David Letterman. He wouldn't let Letterman do a monologue. Letterman was only allowed to do 4 jokes. No Fridays, which is the day that the college kids stay up, the young audience. He only had 5 Fridays a year, David Letterman. Was only allowed 4 band members, no brass instruments, and all these restrictions. So that was the best case scenario for Johnny, and it did work out for both of them. But he was definitely nervous about Dave Letterman going head-to-head.
Who he wasn't nervous about was Tom Snyder, who
NBC wanted to debut Tom Snyder after Johnny's anniversary show, and Johnny said, no, I closed the network. Johnny purposely waited till Joey Bishop was guest hosting so the ratings were lower to give Tom Snyder his premiere. And Johnny had every guest he had approval over. So him and Snyder, it didn't go great.
Didn't he own that show? I believe he produced that show too. Tom Snyder.
It could have. I'm not really sure. I know that at one point, Fred Silverman wanted Tom Snyder out, and they were considering bringing Steve Allen back, and Johnny vetoed that for sure. And then Dave Letterman got the gig. But yeah, Snyder and Carson, for whatever reason, they didn't click.
Want to hear something wild, Mark and guys?
Yes, I'd love to.
So I did a little research on the numbers that Johnny was getting from the 60s right through the end. Staggering to know, although there were just 3 networks, that Steve Allen and Jack Parr were also delivering some shows that were doing 20 million viewers. It was happening in the 60s already. And Parr was phenomenal. I mean,
Steve Allen from the Hudson Theater was live. They were doing the show live from 11:15 to 1 a.m. Doc Severinsen was telling me, because he was with Steve Allen's band, they'd go out afterwards. And then Jack Parr, when he started at the Hudson Theater, was live. And then finally, during his run, he went to 6B, which was Milton Berle, which then became Johnny's studio. And that's when The Tonight Show started being taped. But the fact that many people, the power of The Tonight Show, I mean, it was, nothing like that today. I mean, the power that Johnny wielded and all those gentlemen did. Yeah.
Listen, I look at a thing like Jimmy Fallon, and forgive me, but it just doesn't work for me. I believe he's about to say goodbye, but it's one of those things. He still did 8 years.
Yeah, no, of course. We've come to the end of our show, Mark. You have been a delightful guest.
Oh, this was so much fun, gentlemen. I'm honored to be here.
And everybody, you've got to get Mark's book. If you love show business stories, this is the book to get. Tell them where they can find it.
So Love Johnny Carson's available wherever you get books, barnesandnoble.com, Amazon Books A Million. I did the audiobook over 5 days, so audible.com. The Kindle is available. And I talked to over 400 people. It is the most definitive book of Johnny's Tonight Show from 62 to 1992. We go into his retirement years in very much detail, the most detailed that's ever been with a book. So I'm really proud of it, and I'm grateful that to talk about it with you guys.
Mark,
I really
have your publicists got you on some of the better talk shows to study?
No, I mean, it's tough. Johnny's been off for 30 years, and people under 40 don't know who he is. So I was on CNN, which was good. The View, Whoopi Goldberg mentioned the book, and they did a book giveaway, which was really nice. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely gotten some articles written, and I've gone on a lot of radio. But yeah, I would have been nice to go on a late night show, but it wasn't in the cards.
Push for that because you're a great guest, as Julie said.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you guys make it so easy. This has been so much fun.
We're gonna hand over the show now to our producer spokesperson, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, my friends. Mark, it was awesome to talk to you. And folks, I do highly recommend the book and definitely check it out. And so, folks, you've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you guys. So please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you can find us wherever fine podcasts are found. And now you could even find us up on YouTube. If you made it this far into the episode, we don't like to beg and plead, but please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. Or if you're listening to us, why not give us 5 stars? If you're on social media, please follow us and check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening this week on their show. Julian, who you got this week?
Well, we have little Haley Mills, who is no longer little, and talks about all these incredible movies that she made for Walt Disney. And then after that, the post-Disney years. And boy, what a great way to begin. After all those hits with Disney, she makes her first movie with Rosalind Russell. The Trouble with Angels goes through the roof. Wonderful story and a wonderful woman. I'm very happy to have 2 hours with Haley Mills.
That is awesome.
There was a time when she was also very hot, Julian.
Yes.
Hot as in Brigitte Bardot hot, you know.
Yes. Well, I don't think Bardot had competition from her, though.
No.
Okay.
No.
Steve, what's going on over on Saturday night at the movies?
Get to interview one of my bosses from the 80s. She used to be head of publicity at Columbia Pictures. Her name is Kathy Orloff. They sometimes say publicists have the great stories on sets. And Kathy was a unit publicist on films like Ordinary People, Interview with a Vampire, Mission Impossible, the first one. So we have a really delightful conversation about things from the publicist's point of view.
That is cool. Arthur, what do we got going on next time on our show?
We're not messing around, man. I mean, we have Diane Kiesel. She's going to come on. She has written a book about Charlie Chaplin. And we're going to give the whole hour to Charlie Chaplin and talk about a monster success. I guess a lot of young people don't know who the hell he was either, you know, today, but he was something, and that should be exciting talking about him. He was portrayed by Robert Downey Jr. in a movie directed by
Richard Attenborough.
Richard Attenborough, Bridge Too Far. Oh, boy. But that's what we're doing.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We will see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here. Right here. That's right. This spot. See y'all soon. Bye.
Tune in to the Dragon Con Report podcast, your ultimate destination for all things Dragon Con.
Join us each month as we dive into our home away from home and cover the world of con fandom, cosplay, gaming, and more.
With guests each show, behind-the-scenes insights, tips and tricks, and the latest updates on this year's convention.
Whether you're a seasoned attendee or a first-time explorer,
the Dragon Con Report is your passport to the ultimate geek experience.
Join us and let your inner dragon roar.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.